it's what I call the Genesis 6 experiment. And if you look at a typical map like a Mercator map, where I have the crosshairs there, that's where the Genesis 6 experiment took place. And another researcher who's no longer with us, named David Flynn, pointed out that that particular location just so happens to be at 33.33 degrees north by 33.33 degrees east from the Paris prime meridian, which was the original prime meridian, also known as the Devil's Line, before it was changed to the current prime meridian. So if you go on Google Earth, I forget, it was like 34.5 something, I think. That's off of Greenwich. But if you subtract the difference between the current prime meridian and the Paris prime meridian, you'll see that it in fact is 33.33 degrees east, again from the Paris. So 33.33 by 33.33. Hint, for those of you who are wondering why I got 3 3s all over my seed website, here's a little seed for you. Here's a little hint for you. Has nothing to do with Freemasonry. Oh, by the way, you do know that they only counterfeit something that's real, right? There's no counterfeit $30 bills. No, you counterfeit real bills. You counterfeit 20s and 50s and 100s. All right? So the fact that Freemasonry loves the number 33 may just have something to do, maybe, with this, because, you know, who are they? Who is their leader? Who are they following? Well, I mean, the seed war, again, one of the reasons why I call it seed, right, goes back to this event that happened on the 33.33 by 33.33, you know, crosshair on our maps. Okay, and David Flynn talked about that it just so happened to also be 2012 nautical miles from that location to the Paris prime meridian and 2012 nautical miles from that location to the equator. So, of course, at the time when he did this research, you know, it was quite some time ago, before the year 2012, had a lot of people wondering, and myself included, speculating about what could possibly happen with the whole Aztec calendar stone, you know, Mayan calendars, all that, December 21st, 2012, all the so-called prophecies about that. You know, was that did that have something to do with this? You know, there's all kinds of interesting speculation there, but certainly find it, you know, rather interesting. Let's just put it that way. Now, there is another 33 by 33, but that puts you in the ocean here, you know, according to the map, you know, the longitude and latitude. So the only landmass location right there. And, you know, we say that, you know, whether it's actually this is true or not, we don't know. But based on Revelation chapter 12 and the dragon taking down 1/3 of the stars, casting them to earth, many people believe that there's 1/3 of the angels, you know, went with Satan. Well, what's 1/3 of 100? 33.33%. Isn't it interesting, if that's true, that a platoon, let's say, of 200 Watcher class angels, fallen angels, landed on the only geographical landmass location that just so happens to fit their number, 33.33 by 33.33. This is Mount Hermon. That's the location. This is Mount Hermon today. That's the location of the Genesis 6 experiment, and I'll read from Genesis 6:4. The Nephilim were in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same were the mighty men that were of old, men of renown. Okay, so now we have to address the question of who were the sons of God in Genesis 6. Well, there are several different views on this. The oldest and longest held view by far, with the most supporting textual evidence, both in the canonized scripture and extra-biblical texts, as well as in the writings of many ancient cultures all over the world, is that the sons of God were angels, or at least they were understood to be beings from the sky. The second view didn't show up until about 160 A.D. From about 160 A.D. forward, a new thought began to emerge thanks to the initial ideas of Julius Africanus, who just woke up one day and said, "Yeah, I don't believe that." He didn't do much more than question it, but, you know, that sort of started the ball rolling. And it was later that, you know, his ideas were later accepted and promoted by Augustine. And then much later, essentially, it was set as doctrine by Calvin. Thus, it is now parroted in seminaries, hence also why most pastors today, they subscribe to what's called the Sethite view, or that the sons of God were allegedly the good sons of Seth, by contrast to the bad daughters of Cain. Now, please note that Genesis 6 makes no mention of either Seth or Cain. And then there's sort of a third view of the second one, Various late rabbinic commentaries, we find the idea of the sons of God being supposedly a reference to noble leaders and people of high social ranking. And again, this is like an elaborated version of the Sethite view. So that's what we have to work with when it comes to who were the sons of God. Now let's look in the scriptures for an understanding of how the phrase sons of God were first used. Now the book of Job, most scholars recognize Job predates Genesis. The writing, the book of Job itself predates the writing of the book of Genesis. And in Job, we find the phrase in 3 chapters, in Job 1:6, in Job 2:1, and in Job 38:1-7. He uses the phrase sons of God. So let's have a closer look at the Job 38 reference. That will help us understand also Job 1 and Job 2 reference. Now, again, there's absolutely nothing in Genesis 6 which in any way refers to Seth or Cain or their offspring. Rather, the phrase sons of God is a reference applied to angels, just as it was in the book of Job, which again predates Genesis. Job 38, beginning of verse 1, and Yahuwah answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, okay, this is the Creator himself talking. This is Yahuwah talking, all right? He says, where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare, if thou hast understanding. Who hath laid the measures thereof, if thou knowest? Or who hath stretched the line upon it? Whereupon are the foundations thereof fastened? Or who laid the cornerstone thereof? When the morning stars sang together, and the sons of God shouted for joy. Question: were the allegedly good sons of Seth there at the time of creation? I think any reasonably sane person would have to say, no, they were not. They were not. Now, you can look at various commentaries. I just selected a few here. Barnes' Notes on the Bible, talking about this passage in Job. Morning stars, that it refers to angels, seems to be equivalent from the connection, and this interpretation is demanded in order to correspond with the phrase sons of God in the other member verse, sons of God being angels, called the sons of God from their resemblance to him or their being created by him. Matthew Poole's commentary said, the sons of God, the blessed angels, for man not being yet made, God had then no other sons, and these are called the sons of God partly because they had their whole being from him, and partly because they were made partakers of his divine and glorious image. Gill's exposition of the entire Bible says, and the sons of God shouted for joy, which are usually understood of angels. Also the Targum says the same thing, who are the sons of God, not by birth as Christ, nor by adoption as saints, but by creation as Adam. And there are many other commentaries. This is what would fit on the screen. Okay, so most scholars will recognize, because there's no humans there at the start of creation, that the sons of God in Job 38 are in fact angels, and many translations will say that. In fact, I even had an argument with somebody once who was trying to, argue the Sethite theory, and I said, okay, go tell me what Job says. And the Bible that he said, that he thought was a really good translation, he opened it and he read, and the angels of God, and I'm like, wait, what? And so the very Bible that he was using to try to say, sons of God in Genesis 6 had to be Seth, his own Bible translated the sons of God as angels in Job. And I believe it said the same thing in the Job 1 and the Job 2 reference. I'm like, yeah, that's the way it was understood. That was the figure of speech used for angels before Moses wrote Genesis. So it stands to reason that Moses would have understood and used that figure of speech. And again, we see that in Genesis 6:1-2. Also, it came to pass when men, okay, so we're talking about men here, began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them. Okay, so we have a group of men and we have daughters being born to them. That's sons of God, another group, right, differentiated from men and daughters. Sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. Now, people who want to say, again, that this is the good sons of Seth, well, why is it that the good guys are doing the bad thing here? If you believe the daughters of Cain are what's being spoken of here, that was forbidden, just like the Canaanites were forbidden to the Israelites. Don't be messing around with, don't be mixing the good seed with the bad seed, so to speak. So again, everything about the Sethite theory just doesn't add up. If it's the good guys, the sons of God being the good guys, why are they doing the bad thing here in that line of reasoning? It just doesn't make sense. Parallel directly with Genesis 6 is First Enoch 6, describing the angels as children of heaven. And Jubilees also, same thing. Angels of God saw the women, So we have these texts right here, all saying that. And you even have people that were contemporary with the biblical authors, such as Philo, living in the 50 A.D. time frame, in his Book 1, Questions and Answers on Genesis, point number 92. These giants were sprung from a combined procreation of two natures, namely, from angels and mortal women. But sometimes Moses styles the angels the sons of God. So clearly this was understood at that time. That's what it was a reference to. Clement, a disciple of Peter, in excerpt from Homily 8, chapter 13, on the fall of the angels, he says, "But when, having assumed these forms, human forms, they convicted as covetous those who stole them, and changed themselves into the nature of men, in order that, living holily, and showing the possibility of so living, they might subject the ungrateful to punishment, yet having become in all respects men, they also partook of human lust. And being brought tender at subjection, they fell into cohabitation with women." Josephus also, in Antiquities of the Jews, Book 1, Chapter 3, says, "For many angels of God accompanied with women, and begat sons that proved unjust, and despisers of all that was good, on account of the confidence they had in their own strength. For the tradition is that these men did what resembled the acts of those whom the Grecians call giants." Josephus likened the first generation Nephilim to the Titans of Greek mythology. In Book 5, Chapter 2.3 of Antiquity of the Jews, Josephus continues. He says, "For which reason they removed their camp to Hebron, and when they had taken it, they slew all the inhabitants. There were till then left the race of giants, who had bodies so large and countenances so entirely different from other men, that they were surprising to the sight and terrible to the hearing. The bones of these men are still shown to this day, unlike to any credible relations of other men." So the giants, the offspring of these angels he described earlier, were on display even in his day, in the first century. We also have canonized internal witnesses for the Enochian angelic view of the Genesis 6 experiment. We can see that in Genesis 6, Moses mentions Nephilim with no further need of elaboration, which presupposes that Moses knew who the Nephilim were, and so did his audience, because he didn't elaborate. He didn't explain it any further. Everybody said, well, yeah, we know the story. Of course. He uses the same idiom for angels, sons of God, as Job did. And Leviticus 16 is interesting. We see the scapegoat is really being sent to Azazel. Like King James will say scapegoat, but if you look it up in Hebrew, it's a proper noun, the name Azazel, when they cast lots on the Day of Atonement. It's a character found in the book of Enoch, to whom all sin is ascribed. Hence, on the Day of Atonement, the Israelites laid hands on a goat, placing their sin on it, and they sent it out into the wilderness. Without the book of Enoch, you have no frame of reference for who or what Azazel is, or why the Israelites are doing that. This is one of the things that, at least in my mind, gives credibility to the idea that the book of Enoch was known to Moses prior to writing the Torah. And we see numerous description of giants throughout the Old Testament, which you have no explanation for. How do kissing cousins, if you believe it's the good sons of Seth, mating with the bad daughters of Cain, how do you get giants? Where do they come from? You have no logical, reasonable explanation for the giants. You have no idea where they came from if you subscribe to that view. And of course, of the giants, we have Numbers 13 and Amos 2 being most notable, talking about Amorites, and got characters like Goliath of the Philistines, Og of Bashan, who was an Amorite. Both Peter and Jude refer to angels that sinned, who were bound in chains and cast into the prison of Tartarus. What's that all about? You have no idea what they're talking about if you reject the book of Enoch and the story that they understood from it. You can say, well, that's talking about the rebellion of Satan. Well, no. Those angels aren't locked up. Satan's not locked up. We see the apostles are talking about that the devil goes about as a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. That Satan and his angels are out about deceiving nations. Principalities, powers, spiritual wickedness, high places, all that stuff. They're out and about. So who are the angels that are bound up in chains and put in a very specific place called Tartarus, that the Greeks understood to be the prison of the gods? Peter and Jude clearly understood that the angels that sinned and they were put in Tartarus are the angels of the Genesis 6 experiment, written about in books like Enoch. And of course, there are other statements found in the canonized texts which find no precedence anywhere else but Enoch and other texts which affirm it. Now, let's talk about the Archons. Now, it's just a Greek word, okay? The Greek word archon just simply means chief, commander, leader, somebody in a position of authority. That's the context in which I'm using them. And we see in the book of Enoch that there were 200 Watcher-class angels that landed on Mount Hermon in the days of Jared. And among the 200 Watchers, we have a number of them are named. And we see in 1 Enoch chapter 72, the names I have, I'm not going to read through all this here just for the sake of time, but you see the names that I have highlighted here in yellow, that there were 21 names there. And if you add Satan to that list as their commander, then you end up with 22. And I don't know, maybe this is just a coincidence, but it makes me wonder if that may not be the reason before why Paramount Pictures has 22 stars, and in their latest version of this logo, the animated version of it, shows you're looking up at the sky and you see these stars fall from heaven, and they come down and they kind of skim over some water, and then they form this position right here over a mountaintop. You know, this, just one of those things that make you go, makes you wonder. All right, so these are the angels that left their first estate that Peter and Jude are referring to. We see in 1 Peter chapter 3, "For Christ also suffered once for sins, the righteous for the unrighteous, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the Spirit, in which he went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison." And the word used there, I believe, is caruso. It's I think King James uses preach to the spirits in prison. The word actually means heralded in victory. And my take on it is that the event of Genesis chapter 6 was meant to prevent his future coming, from him ever existing. And so the angels that hatched that plan are locked up now in the prison of Tartarus. And it's my take that when Yeshua died and he went down first, he went and proclaimed victory to those who were in prison. I kind of basically say, aha, you lose, here I am, I win, and I'm taking the keys to death, hell, and the grave, and by the way, I'm coming back, and it's not going to be good for you, and he takes off. Peter also said in 2 Peter 2:4, "For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell," and most of your English translations it says hell, but the Greek word used there is Tartarus. That's the prison of the gods. In the Greek mythology, they understood that. and Peter, writing, in Greek in a Greek culture, he understood it as well. I mean, he was clearly well read on the book of Enoch, and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment. And Jude, back in the same story up, says, "The angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of the great day." So, if we reject the book of Enoch, then what are these guys talking about? We know that Jude quotes from Enoch, and frankly, there's no other angels that are locked up anywhere. You might say, well, 1/3. This is talking about the angelic rebellion with Satan. When he first rebelled. Well, no, they're not locked up. We have several people in the New Testament testifying that he's still out and about. We've got various stories in the Old Testament that he's out and about. He's the roaring lion that seeks whom he may devour, right? Paul also talks about principalities and powers and spiritual wickedness in high places. We see the angel that of the Prince of Persia there in the book of Daniel. So I mean, we see that Satan and his angels are still out and about doing their thing. So if you toss out the book of Enoch and other parallel texts, who are these angels that are locked up then, that are bound in the river Euphrates we read about in the book of Revelation, right? I mean, there's no frame of reference for who these angels are that are locked up unless we accept the Enochian account, which, of course, I do. And, they came down, they mated with women, and in this chart here, my research has led me to believe that the event that I call the Genesis 6 experiment took place in 3550 BC in the days of Jared. And as we'll see in the next segment, the first generation Nephilim that were the byproduct of the union of these angels with women, they lived for 500 years